There are men whose names fill the pages of history books, and then there's Crazy Horse, a warrior so deeply private that he left barely a shadow behind him. You won't find a portrait of him drawn from life, nor a photograph taken by eager frontier photographers. It wasn't by chance. The Lakota believed having your likeness captured risked trapping a part of your spirit. Crazy Horse guarded his spirit fiercely, not for vanity, but because he saw life and battle through a different lens. In an age when many sought to carve their names into stone, Crazy Horse moved like smoke on the plains. His friends called him Tasunka Witko, his horse is crazy, and his legend grew not through grand speeches or newspaper interviews, but through quiet resolve and astonishing skill on the battlefield. In May of 1877, Crazy Horse finally rode into Fort Robinson to surrender. It was a procession that seemed to stretch the horizon, hundreds of warriors, families, ponies, and belongings. Yet, when the Chicago Times tried to capture his words, they didn't speak with him directly. Instead, they heard his story through Horned Horse, a respected war chief who spoke on his behalf. It's fitting, really. Even at the moment of surrender, Crazy Horse remained partly unseen, an enigma refusing to let history claim all of him. But the fragments we do have, carried down by fellow warriors, interpreters, and reporters, piece together a portrait of a commander unlike any other in American history. Most warriors on the plains fought bravely, but Crazy Horse fought differently. His Crow enemies noted that whenever there was fighting, Crazy Horse rode closer to them than to his own men. Not because he courted death, but because he understood where to strike first. General Sheridan remarked on the way Crazy Horse led his charges, always out front, always daring, yet never reckless for its own sake. As one observer put it, he stayed just out of reach. Close enough to inspire, far enough to survive and strike again. He wasn't one to boast or decorate himself with trophies of war. He preferred plain clothing in battle, a single hawk feather, a small stone behind his ear for protection, and a heart painted on his horse's flank. His power came not from show, but from sheer will and presence. His skill lay not just in personal bravery but in battlefield vision. Like Confederate cavalry genius Nathan Bedford Forrest, Crazy Horse could read the flow of a fight and bend it to his will. He saw opportunities where others saw chaos. At times, the mere flash of sunlight off a mirror in his hand could turn the tide. Through years of conflict, Crazy Horse learned the key strength of U.S. Army forces lay in their discipline and command structure. He built his own strategy around that insight. If he could scatter their formations, the disciplined machine turned into frightened men on horseback. At the Battle of the Rosebud in June 1876, Crazy Horse led the combined Sioux and Cheyenne force. Under cover of night, his warriors rode hard, catching General Crook's men unprepared, many resting and tending to their horses. The initial charge of more than 1,000 painted warriors, the best light cavalry on earth, was so sudden and so fierce that Crook's forces reeled back in confusion. That day, Crazy Horse didn't just win a skirmish. He forced Crook's troops out of the campaign, removing them from the upcoming clash at the Little Bighorn. It was a masterstroke, defeating one enemy to isolate another. A week later, Custer and the 7th Cavalry approached the vast Indian encampment by the Little Bighorn River. Custer saw smoke rising from the village, a settlement larger than any he'd expected, and believed the non-combatants fleeing north were warriors retreating. He split his forces, sending Major Reno to attack from one end, while he circled to strike the other. It was a fateful mistake. As Horned Horse later relayed, the warriors saw what Custer was doing and moved swiftly to surround him. Crazy Horse and other chiefs divided their fighters, some cut Custer off from the fleeing families, others closed in from the rear. In the smoke and dust, the battle turned into a swirling melee, so chaotic that Indians later recounted accidentally killing each other. Horses bolted in terror, arrows flew blindly, and the air itself seemed alive with gunfire. Eyewitnesses among the Sioux and Cheyenne described Crazy Horse leading charge after charge. At Reno's position, Crazy Horse's flank attack broke through timber defenses, sending Reno's men scrambling uphill, disorganized and panicked. Then Crazy Horse turned toward Custer. Flying Hawk recounted how Crazy Horse kept firing calmly while sizing up Custer's retreating men. Then, choosing his moment, he led a charge that split Custer's force on the ridge. In the final moments, Crazy Horse, alongside warriors like Ice Bear and Little Horse, led the push that wiped out the last survivors on what became known as Last Stand Hill. It said Crazy Horse personally pursued and cut down a fleeing soldier, as if to underline the fate of those who challenged him on his ground. Horn Chips, another Lakota, later claimed Crazy Horse personally accounted for 31 of the American dead that day. True or not, it shows how completely Crazy Horse's presence dominated the battlefield. What set Crazy Horse apart wasn't merely courage, though he had that in spades, but purpose. Many warriors fought for honors, for counting coups or trophies. Crazy Horse fought for something deeper, the right of his people to live free on their ancestral lands. Fellow Sioux said Crazy Horse carried the dream power of the elements, earth, sky, water, and fire. When he painted lightning on his face, it wasn't decoration, it was a prayer, a way to bind himself to forces greater than any single man. His demeanor off the field reflected the same humility. He was quiet, thoughtful, rarely speaking in councils unless he had something worth saying. Yet when he spoke, others listened. By early 1877, with winter closing in and food scarce, Crazy Horse faced a grim choice. Continue resisting and watch his people starve, or surrender to save them from further suffering. After fighting General Nelson Miles to a stalemate at Wolf Mountain, Crazy Horse chose surrender, riding into Fort Robinson in May 1877. Even then, he did not come to kneel. He came to keep his people alive. His surrender made news across the country. But the press couldn't capture the man himself. Even the Chicago Times, desperate for his words, had to hear them through Horned Horse. Less than 4 months later, Crazy Horse died under tragic circumstances, stabbed while allegedly resisting arrest during a struggle. To his people, it felt more like betrayal than accident. In the years since, many have tried to fit Crazy Horse into familiar molds, the noble savage, the doomed rebel, the tragic hero. But those who fought beside him remembered him as something else, a quiet man with a sharp mind, steady hand, and iron will. The Little Bighorn became a legend in American history, often framed around Custer's fall rather than the Lakota and Cheyenne victory. Yet to Crazy Horse and his fellow warriors, it wasn't about humiliating an enemy. It was about defending family, land, and way of life against an overwhelming tide. He never signed treaties. He never posed for photographs. And unlike Sitting Bull, he never traveled east to perform in Wild West shows. His life was the fight, his legend was built not by chroniclers, but by the men who watched him ride through smoke and gunfire, always just ahead of the line. Today, when we look back, it's tempting to ask who was braver, who fired the final shot, or why Custer split his command. But those questions fade beside the human truth that the men on that ridge faced: fear, loyalty, sacrifice, and the reality that history is often written by those who survived. Crazy Horse didn't leave his own words behind, except the few relayed by others. Yet in the stillness after the battle, when the smoke cleared and the valley lay quiet, his message stands clear. Some things are worth risking everything for. Even as an old man, had he lived, Crazy Horse would likely have kept his silence. For him, the victory spoke louder than words. And perhaps, that is why his story endures, not because of what he said, but because of what he did when it mattered most.